John Harper was a man who had spent most of his life helping others. He was tall, with gray hair that used to be dark brown and glasses that rested lightly on the bridge of his nose. At 68 years old, he walked a little slower than he used to, but his mind was still sharp. After decades of working as a doctor at Mercy General Hospital, John had decided it was time to retire. The long hours, late-night emergencies, and constant pressure had taken their toll. Now, he wanted to enjoy life with his wife, Margaret, in the quiet comfort of their home. But retirement didn't mean John completely stepped away from the hospital. Every now and then, he would visit Mercy General to offer advice or consult on difficult cases. Some doctors appreciated having him around because of his experience and calm way of thinking. Others barely noticed him, assuming he was just another elderly man wandering the halls. That was fine with John. He wasn't there for attention. He simply liked staying connected to the place where he had spent so much of his life. One sunny afternoon, John found himself sitting in the hospital cafeteria. It was a busy day, and the room buzzed with conversations. Nurses rushed past carrying trays of food, while patients and visitors sat together at tables, chatting quietly. John sipped his coffee slowly, watching the scene unfold before him. Enjoyed these moments of peace. They reminded him why he had loved working here, not just because of the medicine, but because of the people. As he glanced around, his eyes landed on Lisa Carter. She was a young nurse, probably in her late 20s, with short blonde hair and a confident stride. John had seen her many times over the past few months. She worked on the surgical floor and always seemed to be in a hurry. What caught John's attention, though, wasn't her work ethic. It was how she treated those around her. Lisa often crossed paths with John when he visited the hospital. At first, he thought nothing of it when she ignored him. Maybe she didn't recognize him, he reasoned. After all, he no longer wore a white coat or carried a stethoscope around his neck. But after several encounters, John began to notice a pattern. Whenever they spoke, usually brief exchanges about schedules or patients, Lisa would cut him off mid-sentence or glance over his shoulder as if searching for someone more important to talk to. She never asked for his opinion, even though she knew he had been a doctor for years. At first, John brushed it off. People were busy, and maybe Lisa was just distracted. But one particular interaction stood out to him. A few weeks earlier, John had stopped by the nurse's station to ask about a patient he had consulted on. Lisa was typing furiously on a computer when he approached her. "Excuse me," John said politely, leaning slightly toward the desk. "Do you know if Mrs. Anderson is feeling better? I haven't heard an update." Without looking up, Lisa waved him off. "Oh, I'm sure she's fine," she replied dismissively. "The doctors are handling it." Her tone made it clear she didn't think John's question mattered. Before he could respond, she turned to another nurse nearby and started talking about weekend plans. John stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. Finally, he nodded silently and walked away. That wasn't the only time something like this happened. On another occasion, John joined a small group of staff members discussing a new policy change during lunch. When he tried to share his thoughts, Lisa interrupted him almost immediately. "We've got this covered," she said with a tight smile. "You should focus on enjoying your retirement." Her words weren't outright rude, but the implication was clear. John didn't belong in the conversation anymore. Margaret noticed the change in her husband. Over dinner one evening, she asked, "Is everything okay at the hospital? You seem quieter than usual lately." John hesitated before answering. He didn't want to burden her with his concerns, but he also couldn't ignore what he was experiencing. "It's nothing serious," he said finally, stirring his soup absently. "Just, some of the younger staff don't seem to respect me the way they used to. One nurse in particular, Lisa, acts like I'm invisible half the time." Margaret frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Do you think it's because you're retired?" John shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because I'm older. Either way, it's frustrating. I still have knowledge and experience to offer, but no one seems interested." Margaret reached across the table and placed a hand on his arm. "You can't let it get to you, John. You've done so much for that hospital. If they don't see..." Your value, that's their loss. Her words comforted him, but they didn't erase the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Something about Lisa's behavior felt off. It wasn't just that she dismissed him, it was the way she looked at him sometimes, as if sizing him up and finding him lacking. John couldn't put his finger on it, but he sensed there was more to her attitude than simple indifference. Despite his unease, John continued visiting the hospital. He told himself it was harmless. After all, he wasn't there to cause trouble. He genuinely cared about the patients and staff, and he hoped his presence might still make a difference, even in small ways. But deep down, he wondered if staying involved was worth it. Was he fighting a battle he couldn't win? One day, while waiting for the elevator, John overheard Lisa talking to another nurse. They were standing near the water cooler, laughing about something. Curious, John slowed his pace to listen without being obvious. Lisa's voice carried easily through the hallway. Honestly, she said, shaking her head, some people just don't fit in here. Like that janitor, Charles. He's always messing things up. I don't know why we keep hiring people like that. The other nurse chuckled nervously. Well, everyone has to start somewhere, right? Lisa rolled her eyes. Yeah, but not everyone deserves to. Some people are just different, you know? It's not like they're going to stick around anyway. John froze. His stomach tightened as he processed what he'd heard. Lisa's words weren't just careless, they were cruel. And while she hadn't mentioned him directly, John couldn't help but wonder if her comments applied to him too. Was he one of the different people she didn't think belonged? For a moment, John considered confronting her. He imagined stepping forward and telling her exactly what he thought of her attitude. But instead, he stayed silent. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Lisa, still laughing with her coworker. Back at home, John replayed the incident in his mind. He thought about Charles, the janitor Lisa had mocked. John had seen him around the hospital many times. Charles was a kind man, always quick with a smile and willing to lend a hand. He kept the halls clean and tidy, ensuring the hospital ran smoothly behind the scenes. Yet Lisa acted as if his contributions didn't matter. John felt a growing sense of injustice. He had dedicated his life to helping others, and now, in his retirement, he saw the same institution turning a blind eye to prejudice. It wasn't fair, not to Charles, not to anyone. But what could he do? He was just one person, and the world was full of problems bigger than him. Still, as John sat in his favorite armchair that evening, staring out the window at the fading sunlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to act. Retirement had given him freedom, yes, but it had also given him responsibility. Responsibility to use his voice, his experience, and his privilege to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The next morning, John woke up with a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he felt motivated to do something beyond his usual routine. Margaret noticed the change in him as they ate breakfast together. You seem different today, she said, glancing at him over her coffee cup. What's on your mind? John hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to share. He didn't want to worry her, but he also knew he couldn't keep his thoughts bottled up forever. I've been thinking about the hospital, he admitted finally. There's something going on there that I don't like. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Something like what? He took a deep breath before answering. It's this nurse, Lisa. She's young and impatient, and she doesn't treat people fairly. Not just me. She talks down to others, too. Yesterday, I heard her say some pretty harsh things about Charles, the janitor. It made me realize that maybe I need to pay closer attention to what's happening around me. Margaret set her cup down and leaned forward. That sounds serious. Do you think it's just her, or is it bigger than that? John shook his head. I'm not sure yet, but if it's just her, then someone needs to say something. And if it's more, well, then it's even more important to speak up. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Just be careful, John. You're retired now. You don't have the same authority you used to. Her words lingered in his mind as he got ready to leave for the hospital later that day. He knew she was right. He wasn't officially part of the staff anymore, and that meant his opinions carried less weight. But he also knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen and heard. If nothing else, he could try to understand the situation better. When John arrived at Mercy General, he decided to take a different approach. Instead of heading straight to the cafeteria or the consulting room, he wandered through the hallways, observing the interactions between staff members. He wanted to see if Lisa's behavior was an isolated case or part of a larger pattern. It didn't take long for him to notice something unsettling. As he passed by the nurse's station, he saw Lisa talking to another nurse named Rachel. They were discussing a patient, but their conversation quickly shifted to gossip. "Did you hear about James?" Lisa asked, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Apparently he's been late 3 times this week." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Yeah, and every time he blames traffic. Honestly, I don't know why we keep hiring people who can't handle basic responsibilities." John frowned. James was a young orderly who worked mostly nights. He was reliable and hard-working, but he lived in a neighborhood far from the hospital. The commute could be unpredictable, especially during rush hour. Yet Lisa and Rachel dismissed his struggles without considering the challenges he faced. As John continued walking, he spotted Maria Lopez, a nurse who worked in pediatrics. She was in her mid-30s with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. John had always liked Maria. She treated everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their position or background. Seeing her reminded him that not everyone at the hospital shared Lisa's attitude. Deciding to strike up a conversation, John approached Maria as she organized supplies in a storage closet. "Good morning, Maria," he said warmly. "How are things going?" Maria looked up and smiled. "Dr. Harper, it's good to see you. Things are okay, I guess. Busy, as always." John nodded. "I imagine so. How's the pediatric ward holding up?" "It's fine," Maria replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "Actually, Dr. Harper, there's something I've been meaning to talk to someone about. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but, well, there's been some tension among the staff lately." John's interest piqued. "Tension? What kind of tension?" Maria glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Lowering her voice, she explained, "Some of the newer nurses, like Lisa, have been making comments about certain employees. It's subtle, but it's there. They act like they're better than everyone else, and it's starting to affect morale." John listened carefully, his earlier suspicions growing stronger. "Have you seen this behavior firsthand?" Maria nodded. "Yes, unfortunately. Last week, Lisa made a joke about Charles, the janitor. Something about how people like him shouldn't work here. It was awful. Charles didn't say anything, but I could tell it hurt him." John sighed heavily. "I heard something similar yesterday. It's not right, Maria. No one deserves to be treated that way." Maria agreed. "I know, but it's hard to say anything when they're so dismissive. They act like anyone who disagrees with them is causing trouble." John thought for a moment before responding. "Maybe we should document these incidents if we can show that this isn't just one person being rude, but a pattern. It might help us address the issue." Maria looked surprised. "You'd really do that? Help me, I mean?" "Of course," John said firmly. "If we don't stand up for people like Charles and James, who will?" Over the next few days, John and Maria began working together quietly. They kept notes on instances of discriminatory behavior, noting dates, times, and details whenever possible. It wasn't easy. Lisa and her group were careful not to say anything outright offensive in front of witnesses, but their subtle jabs and dismissive attitudes added up, painting a troubling picture. One afternoon, while reviewing their findings in an empty meeting room, Maria expressed her frustration. "It feels like we're fighting a losing battle," she admitted. "Even if we prove there's a problem, what can we really do about it? The administration won't care unless it affects their reputation." John understood her concerns, but he refused to give up. "We have to try," he insisted. "Change starts small, Maria. If we can show that this behavior isn't acceptable, maybe others will join us." And if enough people speak out, the administration won't have a choice but to listen. Maria nodded slowly. You're right. I just hope we're not putting ourselves in danger. Lisa already doesn't like me. I caught her glaring at me the other day. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I won't let anything happen to you. We'll be careful, and we'll present our case in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Despite their determination, the situation grew more complicated. A few days later, Charles, the janitor Lisa had mocked, was involved in a minor accident. While cleaning supplies spilled by a careless intern, he slipped and fell, twisting his ankle. It wasn't a serious injury, but it was painful enough to require medical attention. When Lisa arrived on the scene, she didn't offer sympathy or assistance. Instead, she stood with her arms crossed, shaking her head. This wouldn't have happened if you paid attention, she said loudly, drawing stares from nearby staff members. Maybe next time you'll focus on your job instead of daydreaming. Charles, embarrassed and in pain, muttered an apology and limped away. Witnesses later reported hearing Lisa mutter under her breath, "This is why we shouldn't hire people like him." The incident weighed heavily on John. He had seen plenty of accidents during his career, but this one felt different. Charles hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply doing his job. Yet Lisa had used the opportunity to humiliate him further, reinforcing the idea that he didn't belong. That evening, John sat in his study staring at the notes he and Maria had collected. Each entry painted a clearer picture of the toxic environment at the hospital. He thought about Charles, James, and all the others who had likely suffered in silence. He thought about Maria, risking her own safety to stand up for what was right. And he thought about himself, retired, older, and perhaps less influential than he once was, but still capable of making a difference. For the first time in years, John felt truly alive. The fire that had driven him throughout his career, the desire to help those in need, had been reignited. He realized that retirement didn't mean stepping away from responsibility. It meant finding new ways to serve, even if it meant facing challenges head-on. As he closed the notebook and turned off the light, John made a silent promise to himself. Whatever happened next, he would fight for justice, not just for Charles or Maria, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The next morning, John woke up early. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he prepared for another day at the hospital. Margaret noticed his energy and smiled. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" she asked while pouring him a cup of coffee. John nodded. "I have to be. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who's been treated unfairly. If I don't do something now, who will?" Margaret handed him the coffee and gave him an encouraging smile. "Just remember to take care of yourself too. You've already done so much for others." Her words stayed with John as he drove to Mercy General. He knew she was right. He couldn't let this mission consume him completely. But the more he thought about Lisa's behavior and its impact on people like Charles and James, the harder it became to stay calm. He wanted to act quickly, but he also knew that rushing could lead to mistakes. When he arrived at the hospital, John met Maria in a quiet corner near the pediatric ward. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with worry. "How are you holding up?" John asked gently. Maria sighed. "I'm okay, I guess. But things are getting worse. Lisa and her friends are starting to notice that someone's watching them. Yesterday, one of them asked me why I keep hanging around you. They think we're plotting something." John frowned. "Did they say anything else?" "Not directly," Maria replied. "But I can tell they're suspicious. And honestly, Dr. Harper, I'm scared. What if they retaliate? I need this job. I can't afford to lose it." John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be careful, Maria. We won't give them any reason to suspect what we're doing. But we also can't stop now. The more evidence we gather, the stronger our case will be." Maria nodded reluctantly. "You're right. I just wish there was an easier way." Over the next few days, John and Maria continued documenting incidents of discriminatory behavior. They stuck to their routine, keeping their interactions brief and discreet. Whenever they noticed something troubling, They would jot down notes separately and compare them later in private. Their efforts were paying off. They had enough information to paint a clear picture of the toxic environment Lisa and her group had created. One afternoon, while reviewing their findings in an empty meeting room, Maria shared a new piece of information. "I overheard Rachel talking to Lisa yesterday," she said quietly. "They mentioned a few staff members who recently quit. Apparently all of them were either minorities or older workers." John's eyes widened. "Do you know why they left?" Maria shook her head. "Not exactly, but when I looked at their exit interviews, they all listed personal reasons. It's vague, but I think it's code for something else." John leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. "If we can connect those resignations to Lisa's behavior, it might strengthen our case. Do you think anyone would be willing to talk to us about it?" Maria hesitated. "Maybe, but it's risky. If word gets out that we're asking questions, Lisa and her group could make life even harder for those employees." John agreed. "Then we'll have to be smart about it. Let's focus on gathering as much evidence as possible before approaching anyone directly." As they continued their investigation, John began noticing subtle changes in the hospital's atmosphere. Staff members seemed quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Even patients appeared uneasy, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. John realized that Lisa's influence extended beyond her immediate circle. Her attitudes had started affecting the entire workplace. One evening, while waiting for the elevator, John saw Charles again. His ankle was still bandaged and he walked with a slight limp. Despite his injury, Charles carried himself with dignity, nodding politely at those who passed by. John approached him cautiously, not wanting to intrude. "Hello, Charles," John said warmly. "How's your ankle feeling?" Charles stopped and turned to face him, surprised by the question. "Oh, Dr. Harper, it's better, thank you. Still, a little sore, but I'll manage." John smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. Listen, I wanted to apologize for what happened the other day. No one should be treated that way, especially not after an accident." Charles looked down, his expression pained. "It's not your fault, sir. Things like that happen sometimes. I've learned to ignore it." John shook his head. "You shouldn't have to ignore it. Everyone deserves respect, Charles. That includes you." Charles didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the floor, his hands gripping the handle of his cleaning cart tightly. Finally, he spoke. "It's not just me, Dr. Harper. Others have it worse. Some of my coworkers. They've stopped coming to work altogether. They couldn't take it anymore." John's heart sank. "Do you think it's because of Lisa and her group?" Charles hesitated before answering. "I don't know for sure, but it's hard not to see a connection. When you feel like you don't belong somewhere, it wears on you. After a while, you start believing it." John felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone. Instead, he thanked Charles for sharing his thoughts and promised to look into the matter further. As he walked away, he realized that the problem was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about Lisa, it was about the culture she had helped create. Later that night, John called Margaret to update her on the situation. "It's worse than I thought," he admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "People are leaving because they feel unwelcome and no one's doing anything to stop it." Margaret listened patiently. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet," John replied. "But I can't let this continue. Tomorrow I'll talk to Maria again. Maybe we can figure out our next step together." The following morning, John met Maria in the cafeteria. She looked even more exhausted than before, dark circles under her eyes. "Are you okay?" John asked, concerned. Maria forced a smile. "I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about everything we've uncovered. It's overwhelming." John nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but we're close to having enough evidence to present to the administration. Once we do that, we won't be alone anymore." Maria sighed. "I hope you're right. But what if they don't believe us? What if they side with Lisa instead?" John reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "We have to trust that they'll do the right thing. If we present our case clearly and calmly, they'll have no choice but to listen. Encouraged by John's confidence, Maria agreed to move forward. Together, they spent the rest of the day organizing their notes and preparing a formal report. By the time they finished, they had compiled a detailed account of Lisa's behavior, including witness statements, patterns of discrimination, and examples of how it affected morale and turnover rates. That evening, as John reviewed the final draft, he felt a sense of accomplishment. For weeks, he and Maria had worked tirelessly to expose the truth, and now they were ready to take the next step. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew they couldn't back down now. With renewed determination, John closed the folder and stood up. He glanced out the window at the fading sunlight, feeling a spark of hope. Change was possible. It always was. All it took was courage, persistence, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. The next morning, John Harper arrived at Mercy General Hospital with a folder tucked under his arm. Inside it were the notes he and Maria had carefully compiled over the past weeks, evidence of Lisa Carter's discriminatory behavior and its impact on the hospital staff. He felt a mix of nerves and determination as he walked through the familiar hallways. Today was the day they would present their findings to Dr. Emily Grant, the hospital's chief administrator. Margaret had wished him luck before he left home. "Remember to stay calm," she reminded him gently. "You've done everything you can to prepare. Just focus on the facts." John nodded, grateful for her support. He repeated her advice in his mind as he made his way to Dr. Grant's office. The door was slightly ajar and he knocked softly before stepping inside. Dr. Grant looked up from her desk, surprised to see him. "Dr. Harper," she said warmly, "what brings you here today?" John took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "I need to discuss something important with you. It's about the environment at the hospital." Dr. Grant raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. "Go ahead." For the next 20 minutes, John explained everything. He described Lisa's dismissive attitude toward older staff members like himself, her mocking comments about Charles, and the subtle ways she and her group excluded others. He shared examples of how this behavior affected morale and contributed to recent resignations. Finally, he handed over the folder containing their detailed report. Dr. Grant listened intently, her expression unreadable. When John finished speaking, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "This is serious," she admitted. "If what you're saying is true, it could have significant consequences for the hospital." "It is true," John insisted. "Maria Lopez helped me gather this information. She's seen it too, and so have many others." Dr. Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Dr. Harper. I'll look into it immediately, but I need to warn you, this won't be easy. If there's any truth to these allegations, addressing them will require careful handling." John understood what she meant. Confronting Lisa and her group wouldn't just upset a few individuals. It could disrupt the entire hospital. Still, he couldn't let fear stop him. "I know it won't be easy," he replied. "But doing nothing isn't an option either." Dr. Grant agreed. "You're right. I'll review your report and speak with Maria as soon as possible. In the meantime, please keep this conversation confidential. We don't want rumors spreading until we know exactly what we're dealing with." John promised to stay quiet and left the office feeling hopeful. For the first time in weeks, he believed real change might be possible. But his optimism didn't last long. Later that afternoon, whispers began circulating among the staff. Someone had heard about John's meeting with Dr. Grant, and speculation quickly spread. By the end of the day, nearly everyone knew, or thought they knew, that John and Maria were accusing Lisa of discrimination. Lisa herself confronted Maria angrily outside the pediatric ward. "What's going on?" Lisa demanded, her voice sharp. "People are saying you're trying to get me in trouble. Is that true?" Maria hesitated, caught off guard. I don't know what you're talking about." Lisa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't play dumb with me. Everyone knows you've been running your mouth to Dr. Harper. You think you're better than us, don't you?" "That's not true," Maria protested, her voice trembling. "I'm just trying to do what's right," Lisa scoffed. "Right? You're causing problems where there aren't any. If you don't stop, you'll regret it." With that, she turned and stormed away, leaving Maria shaken. John found her a few minutes later, sitting alone in a supply closet with tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. Maria wiped her eyes and told him about the confrontation. "She threatened me, Dr. Harper. She didn't say it outright, but I know she'll make things worse if I don't back off." John's jaw tightened. "She can't intimidate you into silence. We have evidence. Solid proof of what she's done. She can't deny it." "I know," Maria said softly. "But knowing that doesn't make it less scary." John sat beside her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, I'll stand by you. And Dr. Grant is taking this seriously. That means something." Maria nodded slowly, though her fear was still evident. "I hope you're right." As the days passed, tensions in the hospital continued to rise. Lisa and her group became more aggressive, spreading rumors about John and Maria to discredit them. Some staff members avoided them altogether, afraid of being associated with troublemakers. Others whispered behind their backs, questioning their motives. Despite the backlash, John refused to give up. He encouraged Maria to stay strong, reminding her why they were doing this. "Think about Charles," he said one evening after another. "Long day. And James, and all the others who've been treated unfairly. They deserve justice, and we owe it to them to keep fighting." Maria nodded, drawing strength from his words. "You're right. We can't let them win." Meanwhile, Dr. Grant launched an investigation into the allegations. She interviewed several employees, including Charles and other former staff members who had recently quit. Each interview added weight to John and Maria's claims, painting a clearer picture of the toxic culture Lisa had fostered. But progress came at a cost. One night, as Maria walked to her car after a late shift, she discovered her tires had been slashed. A note taped to her windshield read, "Mind your own business." Shaken, Maria called John immediately. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice breaking. "They're trying to scare me into quitting." John felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We'll handle this together," he assured her. "Tomorrow we'll go to the police and file a report. No one should have to deal with threats like this." The next morning, John accompanied Maria to the police station. They filed a report detailing the incident, providing copies of their evidence to support their case. While the officers couldn't promise immediate action, they assured Maria they would investigate further. Back at the hospital, news of the vandalism spread quickly. Some staff members expressed sympathy for Maria, while others dismissed it as unrelated drama. Lisa denied any involvement, claiming she had no reason to harm Maria's car, but her protests rang hollow to those who knew the truth. Dr. Grant called John and Maria into her office later that week to update them on the investigation. "It's clear there's a pattern of discriminatory behavior," she said gravely. "Based on the evidence you've provided and corroborated by other witnesses, I believe disciplinary action is necessary." John felt a flicker of relief. "Does that mean Lisa will be held accountable?" Dr. Grant nodded. "Yes. Pending further review, she'll be suspended without pay. Her accomplices will also face formal warnings. Additionally, I plan to implement mandatory diversity training for all staff members and establish a committee to address workplace discrimination moving forward." Maria breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Dr. Grant. This means a lot." Dr. Grant smiled faintly. "Thank you both. Without your courage, none of this would have come to light." As they left the office, John felt a sense of accomplishment. But it was bittersweet. The fight had taken its toll on him and Maria, and the scars of the past weeks wouldn't fade easily. Still, they had achieved something meaningful. Together, they had stood up for what was right, and they had made a difference. That evening, John sat with Margaret on their porch watching the sunset. "How did it go?" she asked. John sighed. "It went well. Lisa's being suspended, and the hospital's taking steps to address the problem. But it wasn't easy, Margaret. Not for me, and especially not for Maria." Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. You did the right thing, John. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it's always worth it. John nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had spent decades saving lives as a doctor, but now, in his retirement, he had saved something else: dignity, respect, and hope for those who needed it most. The days following Dr. Grant's announcement were tense at Mercy General Hospital. While John Harper and Maria Lopez felt a sense of relief knowing that action was being taken, they also knew the battle wasn't over. Lisa Carter's suspension sent shockwaves through the staff. Some supported the decision, while others sided with Lisa, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. Lisa herself didn't stay quiet. On her last day before the suspension took effect, she stormed into the break room where Maria was organizing supplies. Her face was red with anger and her voice carried across the room. "You think you've won, don't you?" she snapped, glaring at Maria. "But this isn't over. People like you don't belong here." Maria froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she turned away, pretending to focus on her work. Lisa lingered for a moment longer, muttering under her breath before storming out of the room. John found Maria later that afternoon, sitting alone in a quiet corner of the hospital garden. Her shoulders were slumped, and her eyes looked distant. He sat beside her and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Are you okay?" Maria shook her head. "I don't know, Dr. Harper. I thought things would get better once we exposed the truth, but it feels like it's only getting worse. Lisa's friends are still spreading rumors about us. Some of my coworkers won't even talk to me anymore." John sighed. He had seen this reaction before, people afraid to take sides, unwilling to risk their own comfort for the sake of justice. "It's not easy standing up for what's right," he said softly. "But remember why we did this. We're not fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for Charles James and everyone else who deserves to be treated fairly." Maria nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I just wish it didn't feel so lonely." "It's not supposed to be easy," John admitted. "But you're not alone, Maria. You have me, and Dr. Grant is on our side. And even if some people don't support us now, they'll see the truth eventually." Maria managed a small smile. "Thank you, Dr. Harper. I don't know what I'd do without your encouragement." As the weeks passed, the hospital began implementing changes. Mandatory diversity training sessions were scheduled for all employees, and posters promoting inclusivity appeared on bulletin boards throughout the building. A new committee was formed to address workplace discrimination, with representatives from different departments ensuring everyone's voices were heard. Despite these efforts, resistance lingered. Lisa's group continued to grumble about the changes, accusing John and Maria of stirring up trouble. Some staff members avoided them altogether, fearing association with controversy. Others whispered behind their backs, questioning whether the investigation had been fair. One evening, as John prepared to leave the hospital, he overheard two nurses talking near the elevators. "They're making too big a deal out of nothing," one of them said bitterly. "Lisa made a few jokes, that's all. It's not like she hurt anyone." The other nurse hesitated before responding. "Maybe. But you have to admit, it's been uncomfortable around here lately. People are scared to speak up because they don't want to end up like Charles or James." John walked away, his heart heavy. He realized that while they had uncovered the problem, changing attitudes wouldn't happen overnight. Fear and prejudice ran deep, and undoing years of toxic behavior would take time and patience. At home, Margaret noticed John's somber mood during dinner. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. "Did something happen at the hospital today?" John set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "It's just, I thought exposing Lisa's behavior would fix everything. But it's clear now that the issue goes beyond her. Even with the changes, some people still don't understand why this matters." Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. "Change is hard, John. People resist it because it forces them to confront things they'd rather ignore. But that doesn't mean you've failed. You've planted a seed, and seeds take time to grow." Her words brought him some comfort, but he couldn't shake the feeling that more needed to be done. The next morning, he decided to visit Charles, the janitor who had been injured in the accident. He hadn't spoken to Charles since the initial incident, and he wanted to check on how he was doing. Charles was mopping the floor near the emergency room when John approached him. "Good morning, Charles," John said warmly. "How's your ankle?" Charles stopped mid-motion and looked up, surprised to see John. "Oh, Dr. Harper, it's much better, thank you. Still a little stiff sometimes, but I'm managing." "I'm glad to hear that," John replied. "Listen, I wanted to apologize again for what happened. I should have spoken up sooner." Charles shook his head. "You don't need to apologize, sir. You've already done so much for us, for everyone. Not many people would stand up the way you have." John felt a lump form in his throat. "I just wish it hadn't come to this. No one should have to endure what you and others have gone through." Charles smiled faintly. "It's not your fault, Dr. Harper. Sometimes bad things happen because people are afraid to speak up, but you've shown us that it's possible to make a difference, even when it's hard." John left the conversation feeling both inspired and humbled. Charles's words reminded him of why he had started this fight in the first place. It wasn't about winning or proving a point. It was about creating a safer, kinder environment for everyone. Later that week, John attended the first meeting of the newly formed Diversity Committee. The room was filled with staff members from various departments, each bringing their own perspectives to the table. Dr. Grant opened the discussion by acknowledging the challenges ahead. "This isn't going to be easy," she admitted. "But together we can create a culture of respect and inclusion, one step at a time." John listened intently as others shared their experiences. A young intern spoke about feeling excluded because of her accent. An older nurse described how colleagues dismissed her opinions simply because of her age. Each story reinforced the need for change and gave John hope that progress was possible. After the meeting, Maria approached John with a tentative smile. "That went well, didn't it?" John nodded. "It did. Hearing those stories reminds me that we're not alone in this. There are good people here who want to make a difference." Maria's smile widened. "And we're part of that. Together, we can keep pushing forward." Over the next few weeks, John and Maria continued working with the committee to implement new policies. They helped draft guidelines for addressing discriminatory behavior and organized workshops to educate staff members about unconscious bias. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere at the hospital began to shift. Not everyone embraced the changes immediately, but small victories kept them motivated. One day, a patient thanked Charles for his hard work, calling him an essential part of the team. Another time, James returned to the hospital after reconsidering his resignation, encouraged by the steps being taken to improve the workplace. Through it all, John and Maria remained steadfast. They celebrated the wins, no matter how small, and faced setbacks with resilience. Though the road ahead was uncertain, they knew they had already accomplished something important. They had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. As John reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that retirement hadn't meant stepping away from responsibility. Instead, it had given him the freedom to focus on what truly mattered, helping others. And in doing so, he had rediscovered a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. One evening, as he and Margaret sat on their porch watching the sunset, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. Margaret smiled. "Yes, you have. And there's still more to do. But you've already made such a difference." John nodded, feeling at peace. The fight wasn't over, but he knew they were moving in the right direction. Together they had planted a seed, and with care and determination it would continue to grow. Months had passed since John Harper and Maria Lopez first began their fight against discrimination at Mercy General Hospital. The changes they helped implement were slowly taking root, but the journey was far from smooth. While some staff members embraced the new policies, others resisted, clinging to old habits and attitudes. Despite the challenges, John and Maria remained committed to their cause, knowing that progress often came in small, incremental steps. One crisp autumn morning, John arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He had been invited to speak at a special assembly organized by the Diversity Committee. It was an opportunity to reflect on how far they had come and to remind everyone of the work still ahead. As he walked through the familiar hallways, he noticed subtle signs of change. Posters promoting inclusivity adorned the walls, and conversations among staff members seemed warmer, more respectful. When he reached the conference room where the assembly was being held, he found Maria waiting for him. She looked nervous but excited. "Are you ready?" she asked with a small smile. John nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The room filled quickly with employees from every department: doctors, nurses, janitors, orderlies, and administrators. Dr. Emily Grant stood at the front to introduce the session. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Today we're here to celebrate the progress we've made and to acknowledge the challenges that remain. We've asked Dr. Harper to share his thoughts because his courage inspired us to take action. Please welcome him." John stepped forward, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you, Dr. Grant, and thank you all for being here today. When Maria and I started this journey, we didn't know where it would lead. All we knew was that something needed to change. People were being treated unfairly, not because of what they did, but because of who they were. That wasn't right, and it wasn't fair." He paused, scanning the room. Some faces showed understanding, while others remained guarded. "Change is hard," he continued. "It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our workplace, but it's also necessary. Over the past few months, we've taken important steps toward creating a culture of respect and inclusion. Mandatory training sessions, open discussions, and policy reforms have laid the foundation for a better future." John gestured toward Maria, who sat near the front. None of this would have been possible without people like Maria, people willing to stand up and say, "This isn't okay." She risked her job, her safety, and her peace of mind to fight for justice, and she's not alone. There are many of you here today who have supported this effort, whether by speaking out, attending workshops, or simply treating your coworkers with kindness and respect. His voice softened. But let's not pretend the work is done. There will always be moments when we fall short, when old biases creep back in. That's human nature. What matters is how we respond, how we hold ourselves accountable and continue, striving to do better. The room fell silent as John concluded his remarks. We owe it to each other, to Charles, James, and everyone else who has felt unwelcome here, to keep pushing forward. Together we can build a hospital where everyone feels valued, respected, and safe. Thank you. Applause erupted, filling the room with warmth. Maria joined John at the front, her eyes glistening with tears. "That was beautiful," she whispered. After the assembly, several staff members approached John and Maria to express their gratitude. Some admitted they had doubted the need for change at first, but now saw its importance. Others shared personal stories of discrimination they had faced, thanking John and Maria for giving them a voice. Later that afternoon, John visited Charles, who was restocking supplies in a storage closet. "How are things going?" John asked warmly. Charles smiled. "Much better, Dr. Harper. People seem kinder, like they see me differently now." "That's wonderful to hear," John replied. "You deserve to be treated with respect, Charles. Don't ever forget that." Charles nodded. "Thank you for everything. You've given us hope." As John left the hospital that evening, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. Yes, there were still obstacles to overcome, but the tide was turning. Slowly, steadily, the hospital was becoming a place where everyone belonged. At home, Margaret greeted him with a hug. "How did it go?" "It went well," John said, smiling. "People are starting to understand why this matters. It's not perfect, but it's progress." Margaret kissed his cheek. "I'm so proud of you, John. You've made such a difference." Over the next few weeks, life at Mercy General continued to improve. Lisa Carter's suspension ended, but she returned to work under strict supervision. Her behavior had softened slightly, though whispers of resentment still lingered. The diversity committee remained active, hosting regular meetings and workshops to reinforce positive change. Maria, too, found renewed purpose in her work. With John's encouragement, she became a vocal advocate for marginalized employees, helping them navigate challenges and ensuring their voices were heard. Together, she and John formed a support network for staff members who felt excluded or mistreated, a safe space where they could share concerns and seek guidance. One day, as John prepared to leave the hospital for what might be his final volunteer shift, Maria stopped him near the entrance. "Dr. Harper, wait," she called, jogging to catch up. "Before you go, I wanted to say something." John turned, curious. "What is it?" Maria hesitated, then smiled. "Thank you for believing in me, for standing by my side, and for reminding me that doing the right thing is always worth it. You've changed my life and so many others' lives forever." John felt a lump form in his throat. "Maria, you've done most of the heavy lifting. I'm just glad I could help." She shook her head. "No, Dr. Harper. This wouldn't have happened without you. You gave me strength when I needed it most." They hugged briefly, both aware of how much they had grown through this experience. As John walked to his car, he glanced back at the hospital one last time. The building looked the same as it always had. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. It was quieter, calmer, more united. Driving home, John reflected on everything that had transpired. He thought about Charles, James, Maria, and all the others who had inspired him to act. He thought about Lisa and her group, realizing that even those resistant to change could learn and grow, if given the chance. Most of all, he thought about the power of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. When he arrived home, Margaret was waiting for him on the porch. "How was your day?" she asked. John sat beside her, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "It was good," he said simply. "Really good." Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. "You should be proud of yourself, John. You've accomplished something incredible." He nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. Retirement had taught him that stepping away from responsibility didn't mean stepping away from impact. In fact, it had given him the freedom to focus on what truly mattered, making the world a little kinder, a little fairer for the people around him. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, John allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he knew the hospital and the people within it were stronger because of what they had endured together.